You're listening to Beyond the Sermon, the podcast of First Methodist Church in Collingswood, New Jersey. On our podcast, the goal is not just to share our sermons, but to go beyond the sermon and talk about what we're learning and what God is doing in us and in our community. The conversation you're about to join was inspired by our 2024 summer sermon series, Apocalypse Now, Revelation's Call to be Faithful Witnesses. In this series, we're talking about what Revelation meant for its original audience and what it means for the church today. You can find more information about our church at fumccollingswood.org. Thanks for joining us for this conversation.
We haven't recorded since June?
June.
Yeah. It's been a long 2 months, Scott.
It has been a long 2 months. A lot's happened, hasn't it, Jeremy?
Wow. It almost seems like another lifetime ago. Well, I hope that everyone that's listening is doing well and has had a good summer. I feel like I also haven't seen a lot of people because you've been gone off from our life. I've been gone with between camps and mission trip and saw a bunch of people at VBS. But if you weren't at VBS, I probably didn't see you. And then I was in Mexico, and now I'm back for a little bit, and then we have a conference. It's nonstop roll of events, but all really good and fruitful. And so curious, highlight reel best parts of this summer so far. And they don't all have to be wise, spiritual.
Start before or after our epic trip out west?
We can count the trip out west.
Okay, well then that's one of the highlights. Yeah. We don't need to go into all those details because we did that in June sometime. But that was, once in a lifetime kind of trip for our family, and it was great. VBS was a lot of fun this year, seeing the kids running around and having a good time and all that kind of stuff. The Olympic theme ended up working out really well and played well with the Olympics actually going on and all of that. And then I think a third one might be we spent a week down at South Seaville camp meeting.
Oh yeah.
And that was my first time ever to be there. And just had a really great time. And it was good to be in a camp setting that was different than, usually we're at Delanco. And there's a whole different level of expectations on me and my time when I'm there as part of the board of directors and the personnel committee and all that kind of stuff. But just to be there and, my only job was to teach Bible study in the morning. And the rest of the time we could just
enjoy,
be and write my Bible study for the next morning.
Been there at camp. Yep.
But that was a great week for us as well. Crazy summer though. Just I think VBS week, that first full week in August, was the first time all 6 of my family were in the house from Sunday through Saturday. Because just the rest of the summer, there's people at camp. Tim had a couple sports camps he went to. A couple of kids went on the youth mission trip. Yeah. We were down at South Seaville. It was a lot. So once VBS kind of finished up, it was like, all right, now we get to take a breath and start thinking about the fall.
Yeah, that was the thing where, I'm looking and from, besides the mission trip, from a ministry standpoint for the church, it seemed like, this is where you get the breather is in the summer. And then it was just nonstop, back to back to back to back to back. All really great and fruitful stuff. It just wasn't I wouldn't say relaxed, but more relaxed schedule-wise than maybe I'd anticipated. But no, it was really, really good. If you can't hear, maybe I'll leave in those couple of coughs as I edit out the rest of them. Currently sick as we record. My boys have gotten sick, and then it's just been in the house. And so for coming on close to a week, we've just been clogged up and snotty-nosed and not sleeping. And I had a stress fracture in my ankle from Delanco camp that required about a month of not being on my foot. So people saw me around with my peg leg or my knee scooter, and that got me through mission trip to Harrisburg with the youth. That got me through time in Mexico with the Sponsored Children's Project. And we made it. Doctor said I did a great job, and I'm back on my feet. And
both of them.
That's exciting. I'll say highlights. There's a lot of good from little just conversations of an hour that have been fruitful with youth to like the whole Mexico trip and all that we were able to accomplish with providing school supplies, but then also more importantly, getting them into the church. And so one of the things that was so encouraging, a teacher came up to me and was like, there's 44 kids enrolled at the school in this grade. 40 of them came to Bible school. And after vacation Bible school, 22 or 24 of them came to Sunday school, and we only had 8 beforehand.
Wow.
And so like to hear that we're reaching a large chunk of the community was really, really encouraging. And then to have the personal lean into people's lives and to hear that God had like been working and doing things in the year that I'd been absent, people that I've been praying for. Yeah, youth mission trip, as you guys heard on the last podcast, was just amazing. And so all the stuff God was working in and through me for like weeks.
Yeah.
So like God provided a trial, I would say, and a revelation within the span of a few weeks for me. And I think it's just going to be really fruitful for the kingdom. And so maybe at some point we'll share a podcast about that. But no, it's just been full, a very full summer. And I feel old. Yeah, turned 30. Turned 30, and I was like, oh, it's just a number and change. And then like I arrived to it with a fractured ankle and have to slow down and all that kind of stuff. But God's just been so good through it all. And yeah, very excited to re-enter into the world of podcasting again. Now that we've gotten that break and out of that rhythm, I'm excited to get back to it. And we've been doing the series in Revelation all summer called Apocalypse Now. Since we're finally done our 12 weeks, do you regret doing 12 weeks out of the same book?
No, not at all. Do I regret doing it over the summer? Maybe a little bit.
Okay.
Because I've had to put in a ton of time studying and reading, and it's all been good. It's been helpful. But I've read a couple books before we ever started into the process. But then, I saved a couple of the books that are more commentary style, where it's, read this passage of scripture and then it like breaks it down, goes into the Greek and does all that. And so I've been reading that like along with, a week or two in advance, just to kind of get it in my mind, have other people's voices speaking into, and, not trying to figure it out all on my own.
Yeah.
But no, I don't regret doing it over 12 weeks. I think I'm glad we're not doing more. I don't know that I would have wanted to get into much more detail in this series.
Yeah. Now, as you were preparing for it, and, I saw you kind of laying out the guide of how you wanted the summer to go, breaking up those 12 weeks into even smaller sections. Now that you're through it, is there anything that surprised you in the series that you weren't anticipating talking about or leaning into? Maybe a piece of information you found that stuck out?
We've been in this series since Father's Day. I don't know that there's been anything that has been shocking of like a new revelation or anything in the preaching of Revelation, but some of the sermons ended up being quite different than what I anticipated once I spent more time with that one passage of scripture or, saw how it connected in other places and wanted to bring in some other things. I think it's been good, and some things have come a little different. I'd be interested to know if people feel like talking about Babylon early on in the series was helpful to them, or if it would have made sense just to move straight through. That really threw some people off early on in the series when we were going, we chapter 1, chapters 2 and 3, chapter 4, then we jumped to chapter 17.
Yeah. Well, for me personally, I think it helped me, but then later on, I already forgot what I'd learned about Babylon in the beginning, so it was hard to make those connections later on. Yeah. But also I was absent for a little bit, so maybe it was harder to bridge those connections. But I'm so happy that we've received a few questions, mostly from our friend Jamie. And so I'm so happy that he sent them in, and it was a lovely email. The first question we have that kind of all connects together is when we're talking about all of this imagery in Revelation, not only is that hard for us to interpret in the English, but could there have been a difference in translating it from the original language to the English? And so he was curious about the original language of the text. How often has it been translated before English? Like, I guess through the ages, did it go through a series of languages? And then also, are there alternative phrases or ways that things could have been translated that might change how we view Revelation?
Gosh, yes. So Revelation, as part of the New Testament, would have originally been written in Greek, but you get a lot of John's Jewish upbringing, even through some things, and the way that some of the numbers are calculated and that kind of stuff is very much influenced by his Jewish upbringing. And so that makes sense. That's the world he was formed in. But he would have been writing in Greek, and that would have been the language that the people in the cities, the churches he was writing to, would have been most comfortable. Even though they're part of the Roman Empire, and Latin was the official language of the Roman Empire, Greek was still the language that kind of unified the Roman Empire. So the second part of that, like, has it been translated through other languages? Originally, yes.
I was going to say, like, yes and no.
Yeah.
Like, yes, originally, but now we have access to all the originals, and so a lot of more modern translations just go directly back to the original text and stem it off of that.
Sure. Or the manuscripts we have that survive, not necessarily the ones that John wrote out.
Yes, sorry. Oldest copies available.
Yeah. In the original language of Greek. Yes. And so most any modern English translation that you're reading has gone back to the Greek text. Like the NIV, the NLT, the ESV.
Yeah, all solid.
All of those are great.
Yeah. Because as far as I know, I don't know of, even if you go from like King James to, let's say, like an ESV or NIV, I don't know if any of the big imagery changes drastically. Like, it may say like the prostitute or the whore, like it'll change that language.
Right.
But it's not like the dragon becomes like a large lizard where we think of like Jonah and the whale or the great fish.
Yeah.
Like, that doesn't change.
No. You do get some different interpretive choices along the way. Like, I think it's in the NIV, in those letters to the churches, it talks about to the one who is victorious. One of the other books that I was reading used its own translation, and they kept saying to the one who conquers. Another one talked about the ones who overcome. And so not that they're huge shifts in actual interpretation, but sometimes some of those subtle shifts can change the way we end up reading and applying some of those things. Similarly, when it talks about like the beast, some will talk about the monster, and that kind of stuff.
But I haven't heard of that one.
Yeah.
Interesting. His second question revolves around the numbers that are used throughout Revelation.
All over the place.
Yeah, there's a lot of numbers of, like, I even think of like the dragon with the 7 heads and the 10 horns and the how many crowns and all of that. And asking about like the symbolism potentially behind those numbers, and exactly as you touched on earlier, of John having that like Jewish mindset in regards to numbers and their symbolism. And so
much symbolism.
There's so much in all of the numbers, so we don't have time for each and every one. Scott, what are some of the most common numbers that we see in Revelation and the symbolism or the meaning tied to them?
Yeah. So one of the ones we see both explicitly and, if we were to read closely, implicitly, is the number 7. The 7, we've talked about it before, is it's that number of perfection or wholeness, completeness. It's the divine number. It's God's number. And so there are even some of the different names for God that are used in the book of Revelation that are used specifically 7 times throughout the writing. Specifically, there you've got the 7 seals that are on the scroll. You've got the 7 trumpets, the 7 bowls. Those are some of the more explicit ones. So, but related to that 7, so then you also, so 6 is considered the incomplete number, right? If 7 is completion, 6 is incomplete. And so when it's talking about the mark of the beast, you get the number 666. It's a triple incompleteness. And in John's good Jewish numerology, you can also add up in Hebrew mind. Each of the numbers is represented by letters in the alphabet. They don't have separate figures for the numbers. They just use the alphabet. And so to add up to 666, you get things like Nero Caesar adds up in that Jewish calculation to 666. But also, so does the word beast. So the mark of the beast is literally beast, potentially.
Yeah.
That's one of the words that fits number-wise.
Huh. Yeah, I will warn Jamie and anyone else that wants to go down the rabbit hole, especially when you start connecting the numbers with the letters in the Hebrew language. There is a plethora of connections people have made or tried to make in Scripture based off of how words and sentences add up numerically. But if you're interested in just the general what each number represents, you can go to gods-abcs.com, and it goes through numbers 1 through 40.
Okay.
And gives their general, 1 is connected with Aleph, the letter stands for unity, and then it gives some scriptures that it's in, used in, and then it kind of goes through the different ones, which seems like a simple but helpful tool if you're interested in diving into a few more of those numbers and their connections. The next question we have is in regards to the Antichrist and signs of the Antichrist. How will we know, or what can we look for according to Revelation to know about when the Antichrist is to come out? So let's say, I don't know, did we touch on that in 1 John? Does it talk about Antichrist?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think in 1 John it talks about how there are already antichrists among us.
Yeah.
It's not just a singular one character like we think of when we think about reading in this section of Revelation. But how would you define an antichrist, Pastor Scott?
Yeah. An antichrist is someone who is against the Messiah. Literally. It's it's not necessarily this one cosmic figure who's going to stand opposed and kind of equal to Jesus. It's anyone who raises themselves up and goes against the way of the Lamb. And specifically in a lot of these contexts, they're pointing to leaders who do that. But I think anyone could have the spirit of Antichrist, in that sense.
Yeah.
And so I think there are people who have been raised up in different generations who it's easy to point to and said, well, maybe they could have been the Antichrist. You've got the Stalins and the Hitlers and those kind of figures who just wreaked all kinds of horrible things on entire populations of people.
Yeah.
And could any of them have been? Yeah, maybe. One of the things, and this might answer your first question, Jeremy, one of the things that kind of stood out to me at one point in a new way was the idea that, we don't know when Jesus is coming back, but neither does Satan. And so...
I don't think neither does Jesus.
Right, I mean, Jesus says that only the Father knows.
Yeah.
So we get it. That's a whole nother conversation about what the Father knows and what Jesus knows. We're not going to get
really
into
dissecting the Trinity.
Yeah, we're not going to get into that. But Satan doesn't know. And so, not that he has to be prepared for when that day comes so there is someone, but it's kind of like his MO is to raise up these people, these leaders who are anti-Christ, against the Messiah, who are going to lead the people in the way of the dragon.
Yeah. And kind of taking that imagery of a singular character, I think the final, no, not the final, one of the last questions we have was like is there a movie version of Revelation? And I know it's one of Scott's favorite next to The Princess Bride, but there was a popular book series called Left Behind that was trying to use Revelation as a literal interpretation of the events and then tie a storyline of a handful of characters living through those events.
Who were themselves left behind.
Yes. And so then they made a youth series, and then they came out with a couple of movies, which I really wanted Scott to play my favorite scene from those movies, where the two witnesses that shoot fire out of their mouth are like getting attacked by like this SWAT team, and like all the bullets freeze in space and then they blow fire and like the SWAT team gets blown away. So they only got the first two. It only gets so far into the story. And then they apparently tried to redo the series again with Nicolas Cage a few years ago. I still haven't seen that one yet. I'm assuming it's a masterpiece.
As all Nicolas Cage movies are.
Absolutely. Wait, let me see.
Oh, God.
Oh, no, there's another one that came out in 23.
Oh.
Oh, gosh. 0% on Rotten Tomato.
Oh, my.
Because people don't appreciate good art. Anyway, and so, yes, there is that available. As far as that, I don't know of any other...
Yeah, there were some older ones in, like, the 70s.
Okay.
Like, I think one of them was called, like, A Thief in the Night. And, same kind of idea.
Yeah. And also, like, for me, with movies at least, I feel like there's so much going on. I don't know how you fit it into a few movies. Like
I couldn't even fit it into 12 sermons.
Yeah, like it would have to be a TV series if you were really trying to flesh that out. Now, to be fair, the Left Behind book series is really large.
Yeah.
They just, for whatever reason, couldn't get the backing to finish the movie series. But yeah, I think even if you're attempting that feat, you'd have to go for much longer. But I believe you have one other question. The last question that we have is about the two books, or the two main books that are mentioned in Revelation, the Book of Life and the Book of Deeds.
Yeah, something along those lines. It's here at they're both mentioned here at the end of Revelation, when people come and stand before the great white throne to be judged. And in chapter 20, beginning of verse 12, it says, I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Another book was opened, which is the book of life. The dead were judged according to what they had done as recorded in the books. Jump down to 15. Anyone whose name was not found written in the book of life was thrown into the lake of fire. So you kind of have these two books going on here. This idea that there's the Lamb's Book of Life, which has recorded the names of all those who have trusted in Jesus and walked with him. And then this other book that kind of records everyone's deeds. And you almost
the
get
naughty or nice list.
Yeah, somehow. But you get the sense that, like, as God is judging, he's first going through the Lamb's Book of Life, and if your name's there, it doesn't even matter what's written in the other book, because your name's in the Book of Life, because you've trusted in Jesus, and he has atoned for whatever failings you've had in your life. However, if you're not in the Lamb's Book of Life, then there...
So if you live a good enough life and you don't believe in Jesus, you still got a shot.
No, I don't think that's what I said.
Well, you said if you don't believe in Jesus, so then you're not in the Book of Lamb, then it's the Book of Deeds. That's the backup book.
Right. And all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God.
So it's a very short book. Or is that filled with the bad stuff?
I think it's filled.
So that's a very long book.
Yeah, it's a very long book. Yeah.
Makes me think of what was at the end of John. He's like, if we were to record all the things that Jesus has done. Like there's not enough space and paper, and this is why I shouldn't be trusted on the podcast. People could make that argument, so I want you to be able to clarify why. So then why have the second book of deeds if it doesn't affect anyone where they end up going? Or is it just so they're aware, like they're being read, and so they're fully aware of the reasonings as to why they're not?
Yeah, I think it's the idea that, specifically for John's audience, he's writing to persecuted Christians, right? And what he's saying is none of the terrible things that people outside of Jesus do go unnoticed. It's been a theme that God sees what has happened, and there's going to be judgment on those things. And our only hope to not be judged based on all the things we've done that go against the way of God is putting our trust in Jesus.
Yeah.
One other question that I got in regard to Revelation is, what role does the nation of Israel play in the end times? And that's a big question. It's a big question. Some people think that the nation of Israel, that the book of Revelation is all about God bringing the people of Israel to a true knowledge of who he is. And so they would posit that the rapture does happen. That is all the Christians before the tribulation being taken up into heaven. And the rest of the book, every time it talks about the people of God or anything like that, is all directed towards the people of Israel. And that there has to be some kind of corporate-ish salvation of the Jews before the end can come.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Concept.
However, I think that in most early Christian thought, there was a strong idea that the people of God no longer referred exclusively to the Jewish people, but now referred to anyone who was in Christ.
Yeah.
And so I don't think you have to go to some kind of interpretation that calls for some kind of event to happen specifically regarding the Jewish people, because the church is now the people of God. And so, then you still get things that talk about like the tribes of Israel, because there's still a sense in which they are God's people if they're in Christ, right? Yeah. And so some of the numbers, like we talked about earlier, actually relate to those things. So like the 24 elders that are around the throne, commonly believed to be the 12, representing the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles. So you get the 12 and the 12, 24. Similarly, in places 144,000 are mentioned a couple times, and those being the ones who are saved. And the thought process there would be the 12 tribes times 12,000. That's how they arrive at that number. But rather than relating to 144,000 specific people, it instead kind of captures the idea of the totality of God's people.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that Revelation teaches that specifically something has to happen that brings the Jewish people to some kind of saving knowledge of God, any different than he wants all the nations of the earth to come to know him.
So what's next for us as a series, as a church?
Next, starting on September 8th, we're going to start a series called A Heart Like His. And we're going to be looking at how we see the heart of God in the life of David. A lot of times people want to talk about how David is called a man after God's own heart, and then hold David up as a model that we should emulate. However, you don't have to spend a whole lot of time reading about the life of David to know that there's a fair bit of stuff in there that we should not try to emulate. And so, rather than figuring out or spending some weeks talking about how can we look like David's heart, we want to see how can we look more like God's heart. And what can we learn about God's heart so that we can have a heart like his, so that we can be people after his own heart, people with an undivided devotion to him.
That's good. Exciting stuff. Good to be back. I'll see you next week.
Well, that's our conversation for today, but that doesn't mean the conversation is over. We'd love to hear your thoughts on these topics as well. To ask a question about anything we've discussed in this episode or to join the conversation, you can head over to fumccollingswood.org/podcast. Thanks for being part of this conversation.